There was a point in political culture when, if you really wanted to make the other side look like a bunch of tyrants, what you did was you compared them to the Egyptian pharaohs, right? These guys are, out here, they're trying to build their own version of the pyramid, right? They're using slave labor. They want to take away your freedom. They're horrible. They're bad. Vote for me. Then a little thing called World War II happened. You may have heard of it. And ever since then, the go to analogy has been the other guy is like Hitler. Those guys over there, yeah, my opposition, yeah, they're Nazis. Vote for me. And, it's kind of sad because it has kind of ruined talking politics with anyone because sooner or later, someone gets compared to the Nazis, right? It's Godwin's law, right? The longer a political discussion happens on the internet, the odds of someone making a comparison to the Nazis becomes, kind of inevitable, right? If it goes on long enough, someone will bring Hitler into the equation. That's just kind of how it goes. Um, and what this has led to is a lot of very bad history. A lot of people trying to score cheap political points saying that Hitler was this, Hitler was that, Hitler was pro this, Hitler was anti that, right? And people have been, kind of loose with reality when it comes to that. One of these topics I've seen thrown around quite a bit is the idea that Hitler was a socialist. So in this episode, we are going to be talking about whether or not Hitler was in fact a socialist. I do want to make very clear though, this is not a political show, right? We talk about like history and politics and stuff like that, but I'm not here to sell you one ideology or another, right? I'm not here to, advance any ideology. I'm just here to try to get to the truth, right? Was Hitler a socialist? Well, we're going to find out. And we're not going to, use cheap political comparisons. We're going to use what the historian said, what the Nazis actually said, what Hitler said, what the Nazis actually did. And we're going to look at it and see if that lines up with what socialists do. Sounds reasonable enough, right? Using actual history to answer questions like this. It helps. It really does. I promise. But before we get into that, I want to say hello there, my friend. Welcome back to History for Thinkers, a show that brings history to life. I want to encourage you to join the Discord, sign up to the Substack newsletter in the description down below. You can get all kinds of content there, right? I don't charge for any of this stuff. This is all for free. We're all just trying to expand our minds, think about history, challenge our existing beliefs. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into it. So, the first thing that we need to do when answering a question like, was Hitler a socialist, is we need to think about what it means to be a socialist. Right? This is one of the most overly charged words I've ever seen ever, right? Like a lot of people will say this or that is socialism, but then they kind of have a hard time saying what socialism is, right? Like what is the definition of socialism, right? A lot of people don't know. So we are going to be, answering first, what is socialism? So socialism is an economic system that advocates for community ownership of the means of production. So think about it like this, right? If there is a factory, the factory owner is there to make more money, right? That's under a capitalist system. They're there incentivized by the profit motive. They're running this business. They're paying people. They're trying to increase their own wealth. What the socialists want to happen is the socialists want the factory workers to collectively own the factory and make the decisions democratically. According to the socialists, this will lead to, a better work environment. It'll lead to, more efficient economic distribution. There won't be like one guy that's a billionaire and like a bunch of people working minimum wage. It'll be more equitable, right? This is what socialists want. Now, generally, with very broad strokes, we can also say that socialists generally advocate for the workers and they advocate against private property. These are things that, are pretty core to socialist thought, right? There are lots of different kinds of socialism. Like, for example, communism is a branch of socialism, but it's not, it's something different, right? It's kind of it's where the government basically becomes this democratic collective ownership, and everyone votes. So, like by extension, we all own everything, right? Very complicated, but socialism, generally pro-worker, generally against private property. And that's kind of what we're going to stick to, right? We're not going to muddy the waters too much. I think that's a pretty accurate description of what socialism is. So we're going to look at whether or not Hitler actually was one, right? What did the Nazis actually do? What did Hitler actually do? What did these people say? What do the historians say? So the first thing that we need to look at is, what did Hitler say, right? How did he feel about socialism, right? I mean, this was in the name of his political party, right? The National Socialist German Workers' Party. How did he actually feel about socialism? In a 1931 interview with Richard Breiting, Hitler said, quote, "The basic principle of my party's economic program should be made perfectly clear, and that is the principle of authority. The good of the community takes priority over that of the individual, but the state should retain control. Every owner should feel himself to be an agent of the state. It is his duty not to misuse his possessions to the detriment of the state or the interests of his fellow countrymen. That is the overriding point." So here you can kind of see that he's not necessarily a capitalist, right? At least in the way that we think about it, because he thinks that the state should retain primary control over, right, economics. This is kind of what muddies the waters, because you could you could read a quote like this and be like, oh yeah, this is evidence that Hitler's definitely a socialist. Well, not really. He's not necessarily pro-worker. He's just, pro-government, right? And that's kind of different, right? It's not necessarily the same thing. So under Nazi economics, it allows for-profit businesses to exist so long as they serve the Reich. So listen, man, you are free to get as filthy rich as you want, right? If you want to make money, by all means, we're not going to stop you. Just don't do it and screw over, fellow Germans, right? Don't do that, right? Don't screw people over. If you want to screw over other people, right? People of, the subhumans, go ahead. We're not going to stop you there. Yeah. So in a speech on December 28th, 1938, Hitler said, quote, "Socialist, I define from the word social, meaning in the main social equity. A socialist is one who serves the common good without giving up his individuality or personality or the product of his personal efficiency. Our adopted term socialist has nothing to do with Marxian socialism. Marxism is anti-property. True socialism is not. Marxism places no value on the individual or individual effort of efficiency. True. Socialism values the individual and encourages him in individual efficiency, at the same time holding that his interests as an individual must be in consonance with those of the community. All great inventions, discoveries, achievements were first the product of an individual brain. It is charged against me that I am against property, that I am an atheist. Both charges are false." So there you have it, right? This is pretty clear. He likes the word socialism, but he's not necessarily against private property, which again, that's kind of like a core pillar of socialism, right? They're fighting against private property, and what we can call socialism is what Hitler calls Marxian socialism, right? This is the socialism that we tend to think about as, being actual socialism, right? If someone today walks up to you and they're like, "Listen, man, I'm a socialist," what Hitler says Marxian socialism is, that is roughly what they're going to be, right? If someone says that they're a socialist and they're, yeah, listen, man, I am pro-private property, right? That, that might not necessarily be an accurate depiction of what they're saying there. So, again, it's kind of unclear, right? It's not super clear from these quotes because, he said he likes the word socialism, but clearly, right? Social equity, right? We're a collective race here. But does that make Hitler a socialist? I don't know. Let's further explore, shall we? So he favors private property and individual effort. And, I've noticed a lot when politicians say something like individual effort, what they're actually talking about is capital accumulation, right? Your individual effort, you worked really hard, so we're going to let you get filthy rich, right? And it's essentially what he's saying here, because there were a lot of people under the Third Reich that got filthy rich, and they're not trying to stop that, right? If there's a way that you can further our, Nazi agenda and make a lot of money, listen, man, do it. Go for it. We'll help you, right? And the way that Hitler defines Marxian socialism is, again, what you can accurately call socialism, right? It's a much more accurate depiction of the way that we think about socialism. And this kind of makes me think about another aspect of Nazism that a lot of people are not familiar with. And that is the idea of positive Christianity. So when the Nazis came to power, it happened much sooner than they thought it would. And one of the things that they did was they really hit home on Christianity, right? We're pro-Jesus, we're pro-Christian, we're pro-church, right? And it's not about Catholic or Lutheran or Protestant or whatever else, right? Like they didn't really care about differences in Christianity. Like they didn't actually care about Christianity at all. They were just using it to score political points with people who did like Christianity. And eventually, it kind of became pretty evident pretty quick that Christianity and Nazism are not really compatible, right? I mean, on the one hand, you have, feed the poor, turn the other cheek, be a good person. And then on the other side of things, there's, we should like exterminate anyone that isn't part of our race. And, you can see how these things are not really compatible, right? I mean, I don't have to explain too many other differences here. So what they ended up doing was they developed something called positive Christianity. And this was essentially a version of Christianity that it basically neutered it, right? It basically turned Christianity into a branch of Nazi thought, right? It basically incorporated Nazism into Christianity, right? It made the two one, right? It's very similar to how when Christianity was first spreading across Europe, like they incorporated a lot of pagan culture into Christianity, right? Like Christmas, Halloween, right? These are things that were originally pagan holidays, and they got coerced into Christianity, and now we still do it, right? Essentially, what the Nazis were trying to do with Christianity. So, when the Nazis are saying that they are socialists, they're not saying that they're socialists, right? Because when we say socialism, again, we think of this Marxian socialism, right? The abolition of private property, pro-worker, anti-big business. That is not what Hitler is saying here at all, right? It's very, again, it's like a one-to-one analogy, right? People like the word Christianity, so we're going to coerce it and co-opt it to make it fit our agenda. We're going to do that with socialism too, right? People like the word socialism. We're going to steal it. We're going to take socialism away from the socialists, right? Just like we did with Christianity by taking Christianity away from the Christians. This is what the Nazis did, right? And it becomes obvious once you kind of read between the lines. So again, like I just said, they adopt elements of something that's popular and they basically turn it into something that fits their Nazi agenda. So those are some quotes, right? We could go through more, but I think those quotes give you a good idea of how Hitler actually felt about Nazism. So next we need to look at what the Nazis actually did, right? Because there are a lot of people, a lot of politicians that say really good things, and then they do horrible things. So what did the Nazis actually do? Well, for starters, the Nazis were largely funded by big business and old money. So if you watch the Ernst Hanfstaengl memoir video that we did a couple months back, you'll remember that Ernst Hanfstaengl was the original Nazi Party member that introduced Hitler to the aristocracy. And this was really important early on because, Hitler was basically broke, right? Most of the Nazis basically broke. No one had a lot of money. Everyone was poor. And what they needed was funding, right? They needed money. They needed money to, make the party operate. They needed to, create a newspaper. There's a lot of funding that needs to go into political parties. So what Ernst Hanfstaengl did was introduce Hitler to the old German aristocracy, right? Like Prussian nobility. And he basically won them over. He was like, hey, listen, you're worried about a bunch of filthy, godless communists coming here and taking your stuff? Listen, man, I'm going to kill those filthy, godless communists if you just fund my political party. And, well, they weren't all immediately won over by Hitler's charm, but a lot of them were. Enough of them that the party continued to exist. They got enough funding to, put out propaganda and to, become, the government, a few years down the road. And again, this was really driven by this common embrace of the fear of communism, right? Because who hates the communists or, the Marxian socialists, right? Again, these are words that are very easy to use interchangeably. And I do apologize. But, the people that are the haves, right? The aristocrats, the big money, they are scared of the communists, the socialists, and, right, they want to fund people that are going to stop them, right? Oh, hey, you're going to stop the Marxian socialists, right? Here's a whole bunch of money, right? Go stop them. And, that's kind of how the Nazi Party got funded. So the Nazis also viewed the economy as a means to an end, right? The end being the conquest of non-Germans. And they would occasionally pass collectivist economic policies, but only to advance war aims. So again, like that quote that we read from Hitler earlier, it doesn't really matter whether or not economic policies are pro-worker, pro-business. They are pro-race war. They are trying to, propel the German race to conquer the whole world, right? And it doesn't matter how they do that, right? If it's going to be with a little bit of socialism, if it's going to be with a little bit of, pro-business, they don't really care, right? It's just like, listen, if it's good for the race, we're going to do it. And one of the things that you can point to that they actually did was they cut social welfare to embrace social Darwinism. So social Darwinism is this idea that kind of stems from evolutionary biology, right? That if you just take away, government welfare, and you let the strongest rise to the top and you let the weakest people die, well, eventually what happens is, your society will get better, right? The weak people, the people that don't deserve to live, will just die off and, slowly but surely, things will get better, right? So you can see this as a very big, this is not exactly what the socialists would necessarily advocate for, right? Because generally when it comes to social welfare, people that are socialists, like, actual socialists, are generally pro-social welfare, right? They're not the kind of people that would cut social welfare so poor people die out, right? That's kind of the opposite of what the socialists would want. So, again, in this regard, you can kind of point to Hitler and the Nazis generally being, they're kind of socialist, they're kind of not socialist. There are things that they can do that you can kind of put them in either camp. But, to get back to our initial question, was Hitler a socialist? Well, not really, right? You can't firmly call him a socialist. And essentially what he did was he lied to workers and he lied to big business, right? He essentially told people what they wanted to hear. Now, one of the things that we'll talk about a little later on is how there was actually a big segment of the Nazi Party that really was like like Marxian socialists, right? Like these people were very pro-worker. And those people, they heard one version of socialism. So what Hitler would do is he would see people that like genuinely were left-wing, right? Pro-worker, socialist kind of people. And he would say, listen, man, socialist is in the name. We're socialists, right? We're pro-worker. And then he would go to big business. And then he would say, listen, I know we got socialist in the name, but we're not Marxian socialists, right? We're pro-private property, right? If you want to work hard, make a whole bunch of money, we're going to let you. So, Hitler, when it comes to these words, Christianity, socialism, nationalism, like these words don't really mean anything to Hitler, right? they're just words, right? He can use them to manipulate people into joining the party and furthering his agenda. That's really what went on here. And again, he didn't really care about being pro-worker, pro-business, pro-Christianity, like or whatever, right? It was all nonsense. The Nazis were pro-race war, right? They wanted to exterminate non-Germans and make the whole world a German place, right? So now we need to talk about Otto and Gregor Strasser. Now these guys were brothers who were members of the Nazi Party. And these were the kind of Nazis that, it's kind of weird because these were the guys that were actually socialists, right? They were kind of idealists. And they were essentially the leaders of the socialist faction within the Nazi Party. Now, to keep our story straight here, we need to understand that these guys were members of the early Nazi Party. So at first it wasn't really, the Hitlerian, race-obsessed lunatic bin that it eventually became. Early on, it really was, they had these factions of people that actually believed this stuff, right? Otto and Gregor Strasser, they actually were socialists to some extent, right? They actually were pro-worker, right? Pro-union, right? Anti-business, right? They didn't want people to be exploited anymore. So they became leaders of this left-wing party faction until one of them was murdered in the Night of the Long Knives, and the surviving brother was exiled. So, this was about 1933, right? Not the Night of the Long Knives. And, these guys, one of them is killed. The other one gets run out of the country. So that was kind of the end of this, actually socialist part of the Nazi Party, right? Pro-worker policies essentially ended right there, And ironically enough, this was right when the Nazis came to power. The socialists who had enabled and joined the Nazi Party, they essentially got stabbed in the back, right? Listen, man, we're Nazis, I know I told you we were socialists, but listen, we're not, so I'm going to kill you and run you out of the country. And that's exactly what happened, right? Exactly what happened. And then if you look at what Hitler was doing during this time, he wasn't trying to win over socialists anymore. He was aligning himself with political conservatives, people like Paul von Hindenburg, Franz von Papen, and Alfred Hugenberg, right? These were all people that were, more aligned with the aristocracy, the old right, conservative traditional values, right? That strand of political thought. And that's kind of how it went. And ironically enough, this would be one of the many people that Hitler, kind of talked up, kind of won over to his side and then eventually betrayed because, he didn't actually believe in any of the, conservative nonsense either, right? He was like, listen, man, I don't care about conservative values. I don't care about socialist values. I'm pro my agenda. So when Hitler seized power, he sent members of the two leading left-wing political parties to concentration camps. I think I got them listed here. So yeah, so it was the Communist Party, the German Communist Party, and the Social Democratic Party. Both of these groups, right, they can accurately be called socialist, right? Both of them, right? Whether they were the Communist Party, the Social Democrat Party, these guys were socialists. And what did Hitler do when he gets power? He sends them to concentration camps. So again, this is these guys in these two political parties are what Hitler would have called Marxian socialists, right? And this was the kind of socialism that he did not advocate for, right? Because they're not serving the race. They're, fighting against big business. And listen, man, big business funded my political party. So, see you later. Bye. You're going to the ovens. And then to further, what the Nazis did, Hitler aligned Germany with other anti-socialist countries like Italy and Japan. So, Italy and Japan, not exactly friendly to left-wing socialist thinkers at the time, right? If you recall, right? I know as crazy as it seems, they were not necessarily friendly to socialists. And that's who Hitler aligned himself with. So, the next thing we got to ask ourselves is, what do historians think, right? The people that have spent entire lives, entire careers studying the actions of what Hitler did, what the Nazis did, what actually went down during World War II. What do these people think? What do they say about it? Right? Was Hitler a socialist? Right? Maybe we can chalk everything else up to coincidence. Right? Maybe. And to start out, we need to get a really good quote here from Ian Kershaw, who's probably one of the best World War II historians to date. Right? A lot of respect for the guy. And he says, quote, Hitler was wholly ignorant of any formal understanding of the principles of economics. For him, as he stated to the industrialists, economics was of secondary importance, entirely subordinated to politics. His crude social Darwinism dictated his approach to the economy, as it did his entire political worldview. Since struggle among nations would be decisive for future survival, Germany's economy had to be subordinated to the preparation, then carrying out of this struggle. This meant that liberal ideas of economic competition had to be replaced by the subjugation of the economy to the dictates of the national interest. Similarly, any socialist ideas in the Nazi program had to follow the same dictates. Hitler was never a socialist, but although he upheld private property, individual entrepreneurship, and economic competition, and disapproved of trade unions and workers' interference in the freedom of owners and managers to run their concerns, the state, not the market, would determine the shape of economic development. Capitalism was, therefore, left in place, but in operation it was turned into an adjunct of the state. That was a mouthful, right? That was a long quote. But I think it really does, kind of illustrate pretty accurately what was going down, right? Ian Kershaw does a really good job of breaking this stuff down. So from that quote, we learned that Hitler, didn't really understand economics well enough to even have a clear economic policy in place, right? Again, he wasn't really a socialist or a capitalist, right? Like these are just words that are tools to manipulate people, right? So the people that are pro-socialist, he tells them that he's a socialist. The people that are pro-capitalist, he tells them that he's a capitalist. But it always came second to his ideological agenda. And he regularly expresses contempt and disappointment for the German bourgeoisie, but never challenges them because their support made it possible for the party to exist in the first place. So, they're actually, I don't know if I have a quote in here of Hitler, essentially talking shit about, the German bourgeoisie, right? But he doesn't really care for them. But he might say something about them. They're not being nice enough to the workers. But he doesn't really care, right? Again, it's just nonsense to him. He's after one thing, right? He's after his own agenda. So the next historian we're going to look at is actually an economic historian. So this guy should really know what he's talking about, right? And this is by a man by the name of Adam Tooze. He writes this book called Wages of Destruction, and it's all about the Third Reich. And in it, he calls the Third Reich, a capitalist economy. He says it pretty blatantly, but I do think it's helpful to read out this pretty lengthy quote. But I do feel it's worth mentioning. I am not even going to attempt to pronounce some of these German words, right? I'm not going to try to make a fool of myself. I can't say them, right? And you don't want to hear me butcher them. So he says the word Volk. I am just going to say the word people because I'm a dumbass American. I can't pronounce foreign words. I'm sorry, but I think this quote does a really good job of getting to the bottom of what's going on here in the Third Reich economy. So Tooze writes, quote, "The Third Reich made it its mission to use the authority of the state to coordinate efforts within industry to devise standardized and simplified versions of key consumer commodities. These would then be produced at the lowest possible price, enabling the German population to achieve an immediate breakthrough to a higher standard of living. The epithet, which was generally attached to these products, was people. Right? The people's radio, the people's apartments, the people's wagon, the people's refrigerator, the people's tractor, etc. This list contains only those products that enjoyed the official backing of one or more agencies in the Third Reich. Private producers, however, had long appreciated that the term people had good marketing potential, and they too joined the bandwagon. Amongst the various products they touted were the people's gramophone, the people's motorbikes, the people's sewing machines. In fact, by 1933, the use of the term Volk, or people, had become so inflationary that the newly established German Advertising Council was forced to ban the unlicensed use of the term. So, yeah, I think it's just wild, right? It had such good marketing material that people were like, "Oh my god, a Volk product, I gotta buy it, man." Kind of crazy, right? I couldn't imagine having lived during those times, but right, I think this does a really good job of showing you, pretty clearly what was going on here, right? There still was, capital accumulation, right? Private property, free market economics going on. So at this point, we've established that the Third Reich allowed accumulation of capital, didn't redistribute wealth, cut social spending to embrace social Darwinism, slaughtered the socialists, and considered any attempt to focus on economics, Jewish subversion. Right? If you were a socialist or left wing at this time, you were typically thought of as a Jew. Right? This is a really common narrative. If you look at some of the propaganda posters against the Soviet Union, you'll notice one of the things that they do is they really portray the communists and the socialists or whatever as Jewish, right? Communism or Marxian socialism, as Hitler would call it, is this Jewish plan to take over the world, right? People say this even to this day. All right, so we've taken a look at what the Nazis said, what the Nazis did, and what the historians say. And I think we've got enough ammunition now to say, no, Hitler was not a socialist, right? He wasn't left-wing. He didn't uphold any of these values. He didn't say he upheld any of these values. And the historians back that up, right? Hitler was, he wasn't a socialist. He was kind of a capitalist, but even then, not really. It's kind of a gray area. And I think that, a good way to put it is Hitler was no more socialist than the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is democratic, right? And if you're not familiar, that is North Korea, right? The horrible dictatorship over there. And so, Hitler was not a socialist. And if you listen to someone that says that he is, they're lying to you to try to score some cheap political points by using bad history, right? And again, it was in the name of the party. He locked up people that actually were socialists, right? When it came to the Communist Party, the Socialist Party, right? People that were socialists within the Nazi Party, right? Those people were killed or run out of the country. So I hope that we can stop, right? Collectively stop. I am so tired of seeing Hitler was a socialist. Right? Listen, man, if you are going to try to use Hitler to score some cheap political points, at least do it the right way, right? At least do it the right way. Because whenever you see people say that Hitler was a socialist and, therefore you, a socialist, are like Hitler, these people don't know what they're talking about, right? These people don't actually know what Hitler did or what Hitler said or what the Nazis actually did or even what the historians said, right? Read that one quote by Ian Kershaw, right? I bolded the part where he says, Hitler was not a socialist. It's pretty damn clear he was not a socialist. So yeah, listen, that's going to be it for the episode. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one because, it is kind of funny. I know I haven't uploaded a whole lot lately, and I do apologize for that. I do have a couple series I'm working on. I've got one giant episode on economics. I'm not going to spoil that. I'm going to let, it's kind of a mystery, right? I'm going to let that speak for itself when it drops because that is going to be a big one. Oh, I am very excited about that, but it will take some more time. And then after that, I'm going to be releasing the complete history of communism, right? The rise, fall, and decay of communism, because that is such an interesting topic. But it will take some time. So I'll probably be uploading some more of these like shorter episodes here and there, just to have some activity, right? Like I feel bad, I do still read the comment section and I see you guys like, listen, man, when's the next video coming out? Make some videos. So here we are, right? A few short ones. just so we can remain in contact, right? Like I like to think of myself, I'm like your friend, right? We're here, we're doing history, right? We're doing some real shit. We're having a good time. So if you want to keep the good times going, you know, hop into the Discord, right? We talk about history all the time over there, right? It's pretty small, it's very it's civil, it's tame, right? We don't have any nut jobs yet. So, if you're cool, you like to, discuss history, you have an open mind, you like to challenge your existing ideas of history, this is the place for you, right? Hop on it, right? It's a great place. If you're someone that's just gonna come and like spread some nonsense, don't come. Right? You don't have to come, right? You're not invited. Uh, but anyway, for real though, check it out. The Discord is a good place to hang out. Also, check out the newsletter and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast feed, right? So links to that will be in the description or the show notes, right? Wherever you listen, wherever you get your history for thinkers, you'll be able to find this stuff in the description or show notes. So thank you so much for listening all the way through. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.